Okay, I think we're live. If someone can confirm that we've got audio coming through, that would be a good start. Hi, everyone. Louise and Paul are with me as well. And we'll switch over to them in a second. Sweet. Okay. Welcome to Office Hours number 3. I can't believe we made it all this way. Hopefully there will be more after this as well. So today, a couple of things. Louise is going to be going over the new Substance plugin. I know a lot of you have been curious to see more about that, and I think it's going to be pretty cool. Depending on time, I'll also be going over the Vertex Animation Textures 2.0 node. And as always, if you've got any questions or things that you'd like us to look at, feel free to drop them in chat, ask questions along the way, and we'll do our best to answer as we do it. So I'm going to switch over to Louise's mug, and he's going to get started with the plugin.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and excited to show this. Hopefully there won't be too many crashes. So I'll share my screen. And yeah, so as we announced at SIGGRAPH, we do have a new plugin coming online for Substance. It's based in COPS, which hopefully will allow some really cool workflows. It's almost ready for release. I'm kind of wanting to hammer it on a little bit, some more, and then figure out a distribution plan for you guys, basically figure out how to package all of the dependencies and everything. But as you'll see today, hopefully with minimal crashes, you'll see that it's looking good. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So I have a empty scene here. I'm going to have 3 examples for you. Depending on how we're going on time and questions, I might just take them off the oven and kind of run through the scenes. But just to get started, let's just go into COPS. If you don't know how to do that, you just go from object to image. And then here, you will have to drop in a manager. So we'll do that first. And then we'll have the Substance archive node. So if we drop that in, you'll see that by default, we have a file path, the sizes, and then some basic parameters. Once we fill it in, we actually get some. This is a nice Substance that I got from Daniel Tigger, and it's one of his mountain packs. So if we switch over to the composite view, we'll see here that we have the outputs of our Substance. All of the parameters that are exposed to the archive are exposed over here. And I'll go through some of these parameters in a second. So the first thing to note is that unlike Substance, where you have multiple inputs and multiple outputs, because of the way COPS works with image planes, we can kind of shove them all together. So you can see, even though here we're only seeing the diffuse, we do actually have all of the outputs from a Substance that you would get normally. So I can go through and see my normal map. I can go here and change my normal map style or format. You can tweak all the parameters for the height. So we can go see the height. So that's the displacement map. We can just try play with some parameters around, and you see everything updates. I am running in 17.5, so we are going to release this for 17.5 and 18 when that's out. Hopefully in the beta will just be immediately in 17.5. And yeah, so you have all your maps, everything works there, and that's what you would expect. So now what do you do with it? So one thing you want to do is you want to apply this to a material, or you want to do stuff with it. So what we can do is we can hop over to object, and I'll do a mini tutorial on UVing and geometry generation 2 while we're at it, because what I want is I want a sphere that has UVs like a cube. And that's a cool little thing to basically test my geometry. So what we'll start off with is a box. We will do a UV unwrap, and I will do a quick shade. So here we'll see that it mostly, like, we have our UVs and it does what you expect. What I do want is all of these islands to basically be 0 to 1, so we can get our tiling textures in place. So I'm going to do a UV layout, and I want to use the new stacking functionality to stack my islands. So if I switch to that, you'll see that all of them are together. And unfortunately, I do have some weird rotations. So this guy is looking right, but then the other faces are kind of rotated. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the viewport, and I'm just going to select those 3 faces, and I'm going to drop a UV transform which will kind of pre-select what I need to, and I will rotate it by 90. So now I have my cube with the way that I would like to. And finally, I will do a subdivide to sphericize it. So now if I want subdivision, it's still kind of chunky. We can do 2, maybe 3. And now I have my sphere that kind of has those UVs that I want. So I can kind of see something tiling all the way across properly. So we'll start applying a substance here. So let me rip out this quick shade, organize this little network, and we're just going to use the quick mat from the GameDev tools, so we can kind of skip some of this stuff. And what we are going to do is simply get the path of our cop and paste it here. So I'm going to start doing some bookmarkings because there's a little bit of hopping around between networks. So I'm going to do Control-1 to set my quick mark of my geometry, and then I'm going to hop over to my substance, and I'm going to do a Control-2 for here. So now if I do 1, it goes here, 2 goes there. So I need to go to 2. I'm going to Control-C to get the path for this guy, and then I am going to paste it here. And that's not going to do anything because we need to do op here. And then this is a trick that Paul actually showed me. If we do curly brackets, and then let's see what the thing was called. I think it was diffuse was my channel. Yeah, diffuse. We can go back to here. We can select the diffuse plane from this archive. If we go back in here, what we can also do is we can check this box, which says name image plane from usage, which will, instead of calling it whatever the label was called, it's actually based on the usage. So right now it does line up to where if you see it, it's basically just a caps, but you can name arbitrary things, and then you're going to see, okay, roughness is this output in substance is going to be used as a roughness, which is how they look up their material. So we can do that too. So we can basically decide to use based on the usage. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to change my usage to diffuse, and then I'm going to pipe in my normal. And I'm going to flip it, and my roughness. There's no metallic, so it's kind of pointless to do the metallic. You'll see there's some not so great shading happening right now, so I'm going to drop an environment light, and I'm going to browse through, pick this middle one. So now we're starting to get something a little bit better, and I'm going to drop a sunlight so we start seeing kind of what you would expect. The substance is a little too bright, and that's because of a gamma. I'm still trying to reconcile how we're going to solve that. But what we can do now is just apply a regular gamma node from Houdini. And then it's going to be 1 over 2.2, which is 0.45. And now we're going to go back to our substance. And instead of pointing to the substance archive 1, I'm going to point to that gamma node, which is going to kind of fix that. So now you can see we have our substance. It is kind of hooked up. If I go into my cop again, and if I change, say, the random seed to something like 3, it will kind of regenerate and give me a completely new substance. Once this graph is kind of set up, we can go here and pick a different one. So let's pick this riverbank. And you can see we will get a different substance. And this one also has some random seed parameters, and whatever you expose on your substance, you can kind of pick it up here. In this case, there's mainly just luminosity controls, but that's how that works. Now I'm going to get slightly more fancy because I wanted to get displacement working here. And what I did do was come up with a displace HTA, which is going to turn into a proper HTA. And you can see there's already some hard-coded paths in here, which are wrong. So I'm going to basically take this, and I want to grab the height channel. And now I'm actually doing a displacement. And if I go in here, and we can kind of dial down the displacement a little bit, we basically got tessellation, and you can control how much tessellation you want. So we can kind of go a little bit higher res, you can go a little bit lower res. And all that we're doing here, if we want to kind of demystify it, is I'm basically adding a normal on the points. I'm blurring the normals a little bit because it's a trick in case the geometry is bad, but in this case it's not. Then I subdivide it by a few times. I split my UVs, split my points based on the UVs, and then I have a little point wrangle that can channel, that can source my color map, and that gives me the height, and then I am just displacing the points with it. So it's something that it's really relatively basic, but I do it all the time. So I figured we try to rope this into a GameDev node, which hopefully will be released with the tools. So there you have it. Now you have a little, that's the general idea of the substance node, and if you're using it as a material. So at this point, I'll take any questions. It seems like the chat is pretty quiet, but so I'll just keep moving along. And if you guys have any questions, let me know. If Mike and Paul have anything, I can take it.
No, I think we're good so far. Keep going.
All right. So then the second question, or the second workflow that I am going to kind of take it out is, what if you have inputs? So what if you have a geometry, or if you want to feed some inputs into your substance? So for this case, I have this little skull scene that I've generated, and I'll step through it really quickly. So I just have some geometry that I quickly threw together on ZBrush. Here we're doing our regular GameDev pipeline to where we are poly reducing it, adding some UVs, and baking the maps out. Now I'm baking out some 1024 maps. I'm baking out a normal, AO and curvature, and position. Then I have a cop net. And on my cop net, I basically have my AO and my curvature. And what I want to do is I basically want to shove those two into my substance to generate some masks. So here we can see this is the substance that I have. Let me make the right thing visible so we can tweak it. So here I have a substance, and it just has some really basic materials. So I have 3 materials. So there's one out here that is kind of like the outer one. And then I have 2 other ones. So there's a little bit of a refresh stuff that I'm working out too. Right now the cops don't refresh the materials, which is a known issue with cops, but there's some callback stuff that I can do to make that work. But now basically I have 3 materials, and I have some masks that I can control. So in this case, I can control the curvature for my mask builder to kind of control how far I want to push that. So as you can see, there's only one input. And what I can do is I'm reading in the 2 files that are baked. So I have my AO map and my curvature map. And then I'm renaming them. So I'm basically moving the C channel into curvature. So if we see that in cops, you'll see that if we load it in by default, you're going to have a C channel. And because I am matching the input names by the basically the image planes, then I have to rename it to curvature, and then I can merge these 2 together to where I have my AO map and my curvature map. These again go through a gamma, which I'm debating whether or not those should be built in, and these go into my substance. In the substance, you do have control over what that name is. So if you do want to map curvature to something else, or if you want to map AO to something else, you can. In this case, they would have both be C, which wouldn't have worked. But if I only have one input, you can just say curvature is C. I don't want to rename anything. Just feed it straight through. And now I am doing the same workflow that I have the 2 nodes, one for substance and one for gamma. And as you tweak these parameters, they kind of come through properly. So the cool thing here is that if I were to change, let's just change the UVs. So if I change this merge island, and I'll just turn it off. So I have a little bit more explodey bits. If you see, I kind of broke my UVs. So now the maps that I had wouldn't work, and then the maps that were fed into substance also don't work. So what I can do here is just go to my maps baker. I can bake it, and this is all running real time. So it's going to be probably, it's almost done, 10 seconds maybe. Let's see where it stops. Yeah, 11. So I baked my maps, and nothing happened. So because I need to refresh my substance, and so I can go in here to these 2 maps, and I can reload them, and boom, it updated everything. So this is pretty powerful because now from within the same context, I can do my geometry. So I could have refreshed the substance, the ZBrush sculpt just as easily as I changed my game res. I can change the poly reduce to be a different number. I can re-update my UVs. and then I can quickly bake my maps and then regenerate the substances. The problem is that this is still kind of a manual process. So my next example will show you how to kind of streamline that whole thing together and tie them together. Just as a kind of these levels of higher level tools. So the substance node is just the substance node, but now you're starting to build these kind of crazy workflows over it, which is the exciting bit. So now for the final trick, we have this, which is a simpler substance to where I only have a few kind of some noise and some kind of edge wear. And let's go back here. So I have it doing some crazy stuff. If I undo this twisting, you'll see that I broke a bunch of stuff, and then maybe I want to add a poly bevel to bevel some edges, and maybe I want to reduce some of these subdivisions. So now I have that. If I have my substance, that's completely broken because that was from the old one. But now I have some Python script that does all that magic for me. So if I just make that last node visible, it will automatically cook it, automatically bake the maps, automatically run the substance. So as I update my model, you can have something just automatically do basically the whole process of the pipeline. So you can do something to where maybe you're modeling and you're going to want to see something really quick. Maybe you're, I don't know, trying some stuff out. Maybe you have procedural assets that you want to see multiple frames. Now you can basically generate this whole pipeline inline really relatively easy, which is really exciting. The thought is going to be that now you have a way with Houdini to generate a bunch of procedural meshes, and now you have a way of generating a bunch of procedural textures to go with it, which is really exciting. So now we have that whole procedural pipeline, 1-2 punch of Houdini tied with substance. So that's the demo I have so far. So hopefully this is the didn't crash. Seems to be relatively stable. If you have some use cases or if you're trying to get to this, send me a message and I will try to get you guys into beta. Realistically, I'm just going to put it out and people can take it and start playing with it with the understanding that there might be a couple of rough edges around as you give different substances, but we'll make sure to address those as fast as possible. So no questions. So I will hand that over to Mike.
I'll ask a bunch of questions for other people.
Yeah.
So first one is the second example you showed with the skull. Now that we're able to kind of do this round tripping, are there any gotchas? Are there things that might not work or break it, or that you need to be aware of when you're setting this up?
The only thing really is just the refreshing, because it is a weird layer of indirection to where you have stuff in cops that update textures that then get read back in. Just in general, like if you update a texture, it doesn't really refresh it because it doesn't know that a texture was updated on disk. Like we don't have a file watcher in Houdini or anything like that. So cops is essentially the same problem, that things are changing from under you and you don't know that they changed. So you kind of have to kick it a little bit to make sure that it reloaded. In this case, we can just hard code some callbacks here too, to where I can just say, hey, whenever things change, just kick the viewport and just redraw it. So if I change this mid and do that, you can have it just update. But this is kind of bending the system a little bit against its will to kind of force a refresh. But if you're in control of your pipeline, you can easily just add that in. What I am thinking about doing is basically making a substance SOP that will kind of behave similar to the quick material, and to where you can kind of specify, I want this group to apply this substance, which will kind of do a principal shader with the substance applied to it and everything. Unfortunately, we cannot do a substance mat because a substance mat is VOP based. So it means like if I go into materials, I can't drop a cop network in here, which is kind of unfortunate. But that's just because this is a VOP for all intents. It's Vex. What we could do is go back to the old shop and build a cop net inside here that then talks to a principal shader or like a met builder. But that's something that I'm debating. I think that still might be more complicated than it's worth. That realistically, if I just give you a SOP, that will just behave what you would expect, and you don't have to deal with any material nonsense.
Because now that once the output's been generated in cops, then someone can take that either into the quick material or directly into material in the MatNet anyway.
Correct, but you have to set that up yourself.
Yeah.
So that's the, like, other integrations just have a substance material, which is a nice little bubble wrapper workflow. And even our old integration was that way. It was a substance chop that worked that way. But it's something that is doable.
And then what if, can I update my substance archive while I'm running through this workflow, or is that going to cause
Yeah, absolutely. So no, and that's kind of designed for you to play with that. So there's a reload button here that you can change. So let me do that real quick. So if I go into, let me open this up. So here's my substance graph that I have for the scroll. So you can see I just have a couple of mask builders. So there's this mask builder and then this mask builder, and then it goes into my 3 materials. I think one of these is, let's see, the range is exposed. So this one, the range is exposed, but this one it isn't. So this one is going to be for the aim and occlusion, likely. So let's just change this construct and see what it does. So if you just publish SBAR as previous, and then come back and reload, it should, so you can see it kind of changed a little bit to it now. The mouth got a little heavier. You can just, update it at any point and just kind of keep reloading. You can also change the resolution. It kind of overrides what you have set up internally. So here, if I change it to a 1024, now you have a 1024. And you can do something cool, which is you can animate parameters too. So I can say frame 1, that's green, and then frame whatever 57, it is red, and you can kind of animate through it. And
yeah, just
I don't seem too happy.
It normally requires a refresh in the.
No, I think I broke my substance. Yeah. I think that reload might have broke something.
That was my goal. I was just trying to break something. I apologize.
No, okay. That's interesting. Yeah, so is the keying break stuff. Never mind then. Let's not key anything.
You might have mentioned this already, but which platforms can people expect to get it to begin with?
So it's going to be Windows first, just because that's kind of where most of our games customers are. And then as we tie it into our final distribution package, which might be built into Houdini proper or doing a different build farm that has access to Linux and Mac, we'll start building on those platforms as well. But definitely Windows is going to come out for the beta, and then it will release. Once it's ready for release, it will have all 3.
Awesome. Thanks, Luis. I think that's a good place to stop. There doesn't seem to be any questions in the chat regarding the substance stuff for now. So I think we can move on. Lee was asking about having issues with the GameDev Baker and trying to render a frame from the fluid surface. I have a feeling, Lee, that's because of UVs. If the fluid surface doesn't have UVs, or if the UV is changing every frame, then you might be running into issues. But maybe while I'm going through the Vertex animation texture stuff, Luis could load something up on his side, and then we can tag team.
Yeah, I'll try.
And then, this actually has come up before, is people would love to hear more about the hair cards tool and the hair workflow for games. I think Paul did a video for this a while ago. I don't know if it was ever released publicly, but maybe that's something we should do in the next office hour, is actually do a little bit more of a deep dive into the hair cards, how they work, and kind of just figuring some of that stuff out. So we can also have a look at that.
Yeah, so there was one question. Are you selecting the curvature mask in Houdini, or is that set up in Substance? So the curvature is being baked out of Houdini. So it's being baked here in the Maps Baker. We're baking out a curvature, and then that's being read in with a file stop from disk, and that's that file. And then the kind of curvature selection, I guess, the kind of the histogram shift, or the maps builder, or mask builder selection is happening here, which is in Substance. So it's in Houdini, but it is running it through the Substance part of it. Okay, hopefully that works.
Cool.
I'll stop sharing and I'll try to get a fluid sim going.
Yeah. And then I can have a look at some Vertex animation texture stuff. So first and foremost, I would like to say a big thank you to Ben Laidlaw. Everything you're going to see today was basically made by him, and very kindly he offered to share it with us and then modify it in order to share it with the community. So you'll probably see his name even show up in some of the Python modules that are being used. But yeah, so that's kind of where a lot of this work came from. If you ever meet him or see him, buy him a beer. He definitely deserves it. So why a new Vertex animation textures node? I think that we'd realized that there'd been a lot of requests for kind of minor features that had been building up, and we figured, why don't we try and deal with as many of those as possible? Like I said as well, Ben had actually taken some time to rework the tool in a way that would be better suited to multiple game engines. And we also had some ideas for bigger features that we wanted to add, and we thought, let's just kind of do all of those in one fell swoop. So that's what you're going to kind of see today. Just so that you do know, there is a page on the forum that has a link to a walkthrough, like a quick start, both for Unity and for Unreal. What I'm going to be showing today is the Unity side of things, and I'll be doing a little bit more of a deep dive into some of the features, I guess. And as usual, if you've got any questions, fire away. I would call this a pre-release at this point, and the reason I say that is because there's probably still a couple of niggling bugs that might cause problems. We do have documentation being fleshed out at the moment, and I would like to record a couple of more videos that are a little bit, just a little bit more straightforward than what we have at the moment. Okay, so there's the forum topic. I've put it in the chat if you are interested in kind of seeing those videos. Okay, so I'm going to use the demo scene that's actually on GitHub. So if you go to our GitHub page, I always forget, Luis, is this downloaded as part of the GameDev toolset from the shelves, the demo scenes? Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the thing. So you might not be aware of this, but we actually have demo scenes for every single one of the, let me just find this over here. So for pretty much most of the tools, there actually is a demo scene that you can load up, and that'll kind of get you started as to what's going on. So you can check it out. And to give an example, and I'll just bring this in over here. These are just, basically all the different demo scenes that we have. There's a whole bunch of them. And there's a couple for Vertex animation textures. Some of them are for just quick unit tests. But then also the one that I'm going to be kind of looking at today, if you want to follow along or check it out later, is this one, the Vertex animation textures demo scene, which has in it the 4 different types of exports, as well as a node set up for Unity and for Unreal for each one of them. So hopefully that helps you out. Obviously, as I'm about to start talking, my stomach decides to start doing weird things, and now I'm like swallowing down weird things. Okay, so let's get started. I think for this, I'm going to just stick with the simple RBD and kind of just show you what's going on. So what I've got here is just a very simple simulation of an RBD object, and the output of that is pack geometry, which is important because right now the rigid export expects pack geometry. This is something that we probably will add as a change in the future, where you can also use just animated geometry and then extract the transforms and use that to get it across to the game engine. So let's jump across to the out context, and I'm going to ignore these nodes. They're the ones that are already there, and I'm just going to put down a new one. And if you've worked with the old Vertex animation textures before, the first thing you'll notice is the interface is quite different. And just so you can actually see what the old one looked like, I will load it up as well. So go there, actions, change type, and we want this one. Do that. So the old one is still there. If you have seen files that are using the old one, they will remain the same. But yeah, this is kind of what the old interface looked like. And here we have the new interface. So a lot of the new stuff is really about automating the process. One of the difficult things about Vertex animation textures is there are all these values that you need to set on the material in order to get things to work. And when you're iterating a lot, that can get quite tedious. So that's part of some of the stuff that's kind of been fixed here. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'll just call this stream demo so we have an idea of what this is. And I'm going to point it to that object. I copied this path earlier, so that's going to go into the SOP path. And then the first thing you should do before anything else is set your method, which in this case, I'm going to use rigid, as well as your engine. And I'll talk a little bit more about this dropdown in a second, but for now, I'm going to use Unity, and then I'm going to say initialize for engine. And essentially what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that your texture settings and the paths to a bunch of different files have been set up for you to kind of make the process a lot easier. I've already got Unity running, but I do need to get, if I can find it, the folder that I'm going to be working with. So I think for the sake of this, I'll just create a new folder, call this stream demo, and I'm going to grab that from my browser. And the reason for this is I'm just trying to get the path for that so I can use it in a second. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do here is let's kind of talk a little bit about what's going on. The big thing here is there's a bunch of paths to all the different things you need: the geometry, the textures. In the case of Unity, your material, your shader. There's even a JSON file which will store all of the values that were output. There really is a whole bunch of different things going on. So the first thing I'm going to do is just over here for project, I'm going to update this with the path to my Unity project. And then what that's going to do is it's going to save all of this stuff directly in there, which is going to make my life a hell of a lot easier going forward. So once I've done that, the other thing to note is the name of your node is the name of the asset that will be created. But you can also override that if you want by using component. So I can also, type something in here, and that will become the name. But for the sake of this, I'll just leave this off and I'll just use stream demo. So with all of that done, I can hit render at this point, and that's going to now run through the simulation, generate the geometry, generate the textures, and then it's already storing those directly in my Unity project. Now, before I go across to Unity and start hooking that stuff up, the first thing that I want to point out, which is super awesome, and once again, thanks to Ben for doing this, there's actually an object net inside of the Vertex Animation Textures ROP. So if I double click on this node, it'll actually take me into a context where it'll load in the geometry that was created, so the FBX that you would bring into your game engine, as well as the textures, and assign those to the geometry. So what we're looking at is a debug view, essentially. And if I go forward a couple of frames, what you'll notice, let's just see if we can pick a good frame here. that there's some template geometry over here, and then there's the geometry itself. The template geometry is the original simulation. It was the thing that I said I wanted to export in the first place. And the geometry that we're seeing is the results that you would get in your engine. So this is taking into consideration your texture settings, whether you're using RAW or 16-bit or anything else. And then it's also taking all of the other settings of the ROP into consideration, and I'll talk more about those later. So hopefully what this means is if you ever are unsure of whether or not it's exporting the data correctly, you can just dive inside the ROP, have a look and see if this is working. And if this is working, then you know that at least the data is correct and you can start troubleshooting on the game engine side. So I think that's really helpful. And of course, you can also see the values. So right here in my spreadsheet, I'm seeing all the stuff specific to that output. And one last thing worth mentioning while we're in here, this could also be considered like a template for your shader code. If you happen to be using a custom engine and you want to write the code yourself, you can use the Unity code because it is HLSL. But you can also have a look at these wrangles, because these wrangles actually have essentially the code that it would require to move the points based on the textures. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. I would definitely recommend checking it out, diving inside and playing around as you go. Okay, so let's have a look at actually how this all hooks up, and then I'll go back to this and have a look at some of these settings. So let's jump across to Unity, and I'll just ignore this for a second. So I'll delete that. And so here's what I want you to have a look at. Check it out. Inside that stream demo folder now, we've actually got these folders for materials, meshes, shaders, and textures. So it's already set that all up for us. So if I go into meshes, I can just drop this in here. I'll just zero that out. And this is pretty cool. What it's done is it's created a material which, to begin with, is not going to do anything or not be assigned to a shader. And the reason for that is because Unity requires the GUID, which is different each time you load up or you create a shader. But I can go here and I can click on shader, side effects, lightweight render pipeline, and you'll see there's two here at the moment because it's just created a new shader for me, and I also have the old one when I was using this demo scene. So the thing that I want you to notice is how these values over here have already been populated for me. And the reason for that is when you export out of Houdini, it's checking to see if a material exists at the path that is over here. So it's this one over here. And if there isn't a material, it'll create the basic template for a Unity material and include these values. And if there is a material, then it'll just update those values. So now I can go back and forth between the two without ever having to touch these numbers. Makes life a hell of a lot easier. So that's the one thing to notice. Let's have a look at the textures quickly. Both of them, I need to make a couple of changes. So I'm going to turn off sRGB. I'll leave input texture alpha on. I'm going to set non-power of 2 to none, and I'll talk a bit more about power of 2 in a second. Turn off generate bitmaps and set filter mode to point. And then the last thing that I need to do is set my compression to RGBA half, which basically is raw, but it's the one that you probably want to be using for your Vertex animation textures, or you're going to get weird jittering in your results. So I've saved that, and now I can assign those to my material. So we'll come back here and we'll put that into position, and that into, let's try that again. That goes into rotation. Okay. And it's freaking out because I think I still have a bug with my pivot min and max not actually being set. So I could go back to Houdini to check those numbers, but let's say that I save that file or I made changes, I might not have access to them. So in the materials folder, there is in fact a JSON file which has all of the values that were exported out. So the ones that I'm interested in this case are the pivot min, which is 4.47, and minus 0.63. So 4.47 minus 0.63. And if I've done that correctly, there we go. So that is a hell of a lot easier to set up now than it used to be, hopefully. And the beauty is now that we're kind of good to go, I can start making changes on the Houdini side and everything here will update automatically. So the first thing that I'm going to do actually is talk a little bit about padding to power of 2, because it's something that's come up a lot. And it's a kind of a necessary requirement almost for texture streaming these days. So one of the new options we've added here is the ability to pad the textures. And what that means is it'll take whatever your resolution is and find the nearest power of 2 value and add black pixels for that. So if I just turn that on and I hit render again, we'll let this run. And I see a bunch of stuff happening in the chat, so I'll answer questions in a second. And I can check to make sure that it's working by coming in here and just going into my debug view and seeing that, okay, that seems to be fine. And if I go back to Unity, it's going to re-import, which it's already done. And you'll see that seems to be doing okay. And have a look at that. So now you can actually see the textures have these black areas over here. The material has actually been set to use power of 2. And then we have these active pixels and padded pixel values, which essentially the reason we have those are to create a ratio so we know where in UV space to pick up the right pixel and then move the object. Just to give a little bit more information about texture streaming. So in order for a texture to stream in, and you might know this already, so I apologize, it does need to be power of 2. That's just an issue with GPUs from what I understand. Not an issue, but a requirement. And what this means is it will only bring in the texture when it needs it instead of like loading at the beginning of the level, loading up, and then it residing in memory. So this means now that you still get the power of 2 texture, but you don't have to worry about like how you deal with those black pixels. So I think that's kind of the basics of Vertex animation textures and the new setup. Before I go on, if there's anything to cover, are there any questions? Okay, let's see what. Good question. So I've set up the shader in 2 ways, and I think it's in this one. So let me see if I can find it quickly. Stream demo shaders. So I used the simple lit material from the lightweight render pipeline as my template. So it's pretty much the same as that. But if you have a look at the input HLSL code, so I'm just going to find this and load this up. So let's do that. What you will see is, okay, so if basically the question is how do you pause and play it? The way that I would suggest you do that is through a particle system. I mean, you could also do it another way, but I'm just going to give you an idea of kind of where that code is. Siri's talking to me. I apologize. Because I said serious, probably. So the thing that you're looking for in the code is in the input HLSL, and you'll see over here that there's a line that's been commented out, which is this one here, which is time in frames uv.z. So what you would do is instead of using global time, which is what this one is over here, I would comment that out and I'd uncomment this. And then the way that, like I said, this is designed is to be used with a particle system. So if we have a look at some of the other code in here, you'll notice that, where did I put it? I just need to find it for a second. I've added a bunch of stuff in here so that it should work with a particle system. I've said that multiple times. I'm just trying to find the code that I'm using to do that. Shaders. I think I have it in the soft version. So let's see, soft shaders. My shaders have disappeared. Where are they? Screen scenes. Okay, I need to find that, and I'll put that in the forum actually, just so you can kind of see how that goes. But this is the thing that you really care about, because then through your particle system you can assign the age of your particle to one of the UV channels, and then you can use that to drive the simulation. Similarly, you could probably use a script attached to your object and set it in there. So as long as you're overriding this value, this time in frames, you'll be able to kind of do what you need to do. So hopefully that explains it. What else? Yeah, so from what I understand, the high dynamic range pipeline is based off of the lightweight render pipeline, which means that, and I haven't tested this, but the shaders should work. The reason we haven't done the HDRP ones yet is from what I understand, and at least what Unity have been posting, HDRP is still experimental. And so we're waiting for that to kind of calm down before we do stuff. So you should be able to use the lightweight version. You might need to make a couple of modifications. But just to give you an idea of why we're holding off, even for the lightweight one, there were some pretty big changes from 2018 to 2019 and how the shader system worked. Some of the functions were changed. And so we actually have two versions of the lightweight render pipeline shaders for 2018 and 2019 because some functions had been swapped around. So there's still some house cleaning happening on Unity side. And once that has settled, then I think we'll feel comfortable to release our own shaders for that. Anything else? One of the questions was about shader graph stuff. Unfortunately, the stuff doesn't work through the shader graph. I have tried. We have spoken to Unity about it, and it's something that is on their roadmap from what I understand. But because of how we're making changes to the Vertex shader, right now the shader graph focuses primarily on the fragment shader. And so the factories that generate the shader code for the shader graph need to be modified so that we get access to the Vertex shader stuff as well. So right now, unfortunately, the best way to do this is with the shaders that we provided. As soon as shader graph stuff becomes possible, we'll be including that as well. Could be able to take code here and make it into a more complex shader for either render pipeline. Would be less than those who can use a node. Yeah, totally. I mean, that is the beauty of the shader graph, is that you can create these wrappers, and you can just have these pieces that you can reuse. So people that are not as technical don't have to worry about it. And it's exactly what I would love to do. And as soon as we can, we will. To that point, I'll just very quickly mention it for the Vertex Animation Textures 2.0, and I think I can show this in Houdini. We've actually included for Unreal material functions. So before we would include code for materials, but now, and I'll just go to the existing demo example here. So this will be the first thing that I'll show that you might care about, there's actually two interface options. So by default, it's going to be set to simple. And essentially what that means is you're just going to get access to the paths. But if I set this to normal, that's actually going to open up a whole bunch of extra tabs. So a lot of this stuff you don't really care about most of the time, or you're going to set once and forget about. But that is where you're going to find the shader code. So under sample shader code, after I've set the user interface to normal, there is a bunch of stuff in here, and this is used, or its purpose is for you to create a material function and then copy and paste this in there and then use the material function in your materials. So I'm curious to hear from the community how that works out for you. I think this is a better way to go than giving you entire materials, because what you do with base color and metallic and specular and things like that isn't really our concern. All we're trying to do is help you drive the vertex animation. Okay. So let's go back to the Unity one for a second. And I want to talk about a couple more things before I wrap up. So I think the first thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of going into the guts of it, but you might actually care about doing this yourself, is this idea of engine presets. Because if you have a look at the drop down, there's actually an option there for Lumberyard and CryEngine and GameMaker and Mantra and alternate A and alternate B. And the reason is because this is all just a script that you can modify and then use yourself. So I try to make this as easy as possible by keeping it within the node, so you didn't have to go in other places to find scripts. If we're finding that that's not working out so well, we can always move it to a separate scripts folder, but for now, this is how we'll do it. So if I actually go to this node and allow editing of contents, and then go to my type properties, if you have a look under the extra files tab, that's where you'll find a bunch of the Python scripts that are being used to set various things on the node, running various operations in the background. And one of them is VAT presets. So this is actually the thing that is being run when you choose your engine and your method and then click on initialize for engine. So you can modify this specifically for your project or for your game engine so that you get the settings that you need. And the kind of stuff that you might want to set, for instance, is things like the texture output. So if I change this over to normal, you'll see that some of the new options that are available to you is your bit depth for your image. Maybe you're on an older engine and you only have access to 8-bit, or in some cases you might actually want to do 16-bit for Unity, I might be making some changes in the future to how we export the textures and the ranges, because I found that there have been in cases where it works better. And you can also choose how you flip your coordinates. So, going from Houdini to Unreal, for instance, you have to flip your Y and your Z. Going to Unity, it's left-handed instead of right-handed, so you have to make X -1. And that's what this stuff over here does. So you might have to set this differently depending on your engine. And what this here allows you to do is basically set that stuff up. So all the script is doing is just setting these values, and so you can figure them out, update them over here and save it, and then you don't have to worry about them again. And just to give you an example of some of the stuff that's being set, I'll make this a little bit bigger. But initially I was trying out, or at least Ben had set this up with exporting TIFFs for Unity. I think with 2018 and 2019, it's okay to use EXRs. I don't see the need to use TIFFs, but I think with Unity 5 and before, that was something that you might want to do. But you could also, for instance, set the depth of the image. So if you want to set it to 16-bit, then this is where you would do it. So all you need to do essentially, and you'll see that Lumberyard and GameMaker actually haven't been implemented, CryEngine hasn't been implemented, is you can just copy and paste what's going on over here, and as long as the name of the method matches the drop down, then it'll pick that and it'll run through all these commands to set them up. So this is kind of just a very low level preset system. I think what we want to do is try and make this a little bit easier by maybe using JSON files, so you can just choose your parameter, set your value, and it'll just run through that. But for now, this is how you would go about doing some of that. And then the last thing that I wanted to point out for today has to do with double textures. So this is really for game engines that don't have access to raw or 32-bit textures. We've had a couple of people ask for this, and essentially what this does is, if I turn this on, it'll create two textures for your position. The second texture gives you a couple of extra decimal places. So if you are limited to 8-bit textures, this kind of gives you a little bit more precision. So you've got to consider the trade-off. If I do run this, and I'll just run it here quickly, remember that you are having to pay the cost for two textures, but if you need the precision in order to not get jittering in your animation, then that might be something worth considering. So I'll jump back over here. And interestingly enough, with the latest version of Unity and with using raw textures or RGBA half compression, it actually makes things look worse. So I can't even really kind of show you the results. But if I do all of the usual stuff here, and I'll set this out of habit more than anything else, you'll notice then on my material, I've got a second slot for a position 2. And I can drop that in there, and that'll now do its job. So you'll see that the double textures flag has been turned on, and it is now using both of them for the position. So something you might need, something you might not. It really depends. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention is we are trying to find ways to make these textures cheaper. I've been playing with a number of ideas. Nothing has really kind of stuck as a good solution, but we understand that these can get quite big, and we are looking for ways to reduce the memory load essentially. So I think that's all I'm going to talk about today for that. Any questions on the chat? Oh. Do you want? Okay. I'll switch over to you, and then I'll let you go.
Yeah. So this is just a crown splash shelf tool that just does the default crown splash bit. I'm going into the fluid, and I'm not an effects artist, so I just literally dragged this guy and I got stuff out of it. And what I did was after the meshing, so here's the particle fluid surface. I was trying to bake multiple frames, which is the bit that doesn't work, but I will show you. Let me clean this out and do it from scratch. So here, what I want to do is basically I have the surface, and then I want to bake this down to a grid because I want to just render out all of the different components. So I can just drop a grid, and I just did this. So I know this is 2, and this is 7. So now I have basically a grid that sits on top of it. I want to add some UVs, so just the UV texture node will do the trick. And now I have UVs that go from 0 to 1. And then, so the maps baker does not work with this. So that's one problem that we'll have to figure out what's going on there. But the simple baker, if you hook it up, you can see it already read the last thing I rendered. So you can actually render out your, let's see, world normal is kind of useless because you're looking at the top, but let's say curvature, height. These are probably good. And then we have the normal and everything. So if we just hit render, you're going to get something that looks like this, but with the right frame, because this was cached from something in the past. And
so while that's going, Louise,
yeah.
for someone that might not understand, so because you have UVs on the grid, it's using the UVs to figure out how to transfer the data. Because someone might look at this and say the grid is really far away from the fluid. So how is it making that transfer happen?
Yeah, so that transfer happens basically based on these settings. In our case, we just have it hard-coded to be the closest surface. The Maps Baker actually has a little bit of a more explicit tracing mode. So you can say it's near surface, or it's actually looking up based on the surface of the normal. So the way baking in general works is you have essentially 1 pixel per whatever your texture is. And then it looks up that pixel in the surface of your object, and then it casts a ray down until it hits something, and then it looks that up in the high-res object, and then it kind of comes back out and stores it. So that's how we store, say, a normal map. We basically go from your low-res, we project over to the high-res, grab the normal of the high-res, and then do some math to put that high-res normal into the tangent space of the game res. So now that this baked, we can see we can pull out a normal map out of this. We can pull out a curvature map out of it, ambient occlusion, height, and all sorts of cool informations on it. The bug that happened was we do have in the simple baker the ability of actually rendering out a frame range, but this is currently not hooked up in the bottom as part of some updates that we did. So we'll get that fixed to you ASAP. Right now, it just makes the same frame over and over again. But in theory, once we get that bug fixed, you'll be able to actually write out all of the sequences for that plane, and it will allow you to do stuff that's maybe slightly fancier than your just projection. So if you want to do some decals, you can do that. And you can even do something like a clip and slice out the rest of the geometry, so you only have the kind of crown to work with. Yeah, so we're going to work on a couple of these issues, but as far as baking is concerned, really you just need a target geometry to project on with UVs, and then use one of the bakers to get that over.
Awesome. Thanks for showing that.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think we are done for the day. So thanks to everyone for tuning in. I hope it was useful. Thank you to Louise and Paul. And we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
It's taking its time stopping, but almost done.